Hello, I'm Brian Grimm, president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. Earlier this year, back when we could all still meet face-to-face, I contributed a piece for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos titled, "Diversity is the Top of the Corporate Agenda. Why doesn't that include faith?" In it, I summarized our data showing that the majority of Fortune 100 companies fail to mention faith or religion as part of diversity efforts. Faith and core beliefs are taboo topics in many workplaces, but this is changing. A gathering wind of freedom is gaining strength. It's accelerating in this time when employers are pressed, perhaps as never before, to find new ways to inspire and motivate their people to collaborate, create, execute business, often while working remotely. In the wake of pioneering religious diversity work of companies like American Airlines, Texas Instruments, Intel, and Tyson Foods, more leading companies are realizing that people's diverse personal faiths and beliefs give meaning and purpose to their work. These companies are leaning against powerful cultural forces that feed cynicism and fear about one's and another's motives. They're freeing employees to relate to one another on a more profound, heartfelt level. In doing so, they're enabling authenticity, reconciliation, and trust across cultural divides. Increasingly, workplace leaders are realizing that their most powerfully impactful products are not limited to the products they make or the services they provide. They're seeing that through their day-to-day operations, they can also export a culture of respect, compassion, and freedom, a different kind of product that enriches the entire world. It's time for this change and this authenticity to take root and to be welcomed and celebrated in businesses at home and abroad. The Religious Freedom and Business Foundation's Corporate Religious Equity and Diversity Index, or the READY Index for short, spotlights a diverse spectrum of companies where people are encouraged to bring their whole selves to work, including their faith. It's happening in companies like Google, Tyson Foods, American Airlines, Salesforce, American Express, PayPal, Intel, and Texas Instruments, to name a few. In thousands of workplaces, such as the military, hospitals, athletics, and even the U.S. Senate, chaplains are a visible symbol of this movement. In other places, like many Fortune 500 companies, faith-oriented employee resource groups, or ERGs for short, are proliferating. In other companies, faith is part and parcel of the business itself, such as the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal order that is also in the life insurance business to the tune of having about $100 billion of insurance in force. And it was a tremendous honor on the heels of Davos this year to have co-hosted with the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America the first ever national conference for Fortune 500 companies with faith-oriented ERGs attending, coming from many of the most successful companies in our country. Truly, the Bush School of Business, with its aim to develop virtuous business leaders who are a force for good, was made for a time such as this. A few years ago, I was asked by the Vatican to offer insights on how religious freedom relates to their seminal document on faith and business called The Vocation of the Business Leader. As Catholics, we often pray for vocations, that is, praying for young men and women to answer God's call to become priests or nuns. Is the Vatican putting business people in the same category of religious sisters, priests, and brothers? No, and yes. No, the Vatican is not asking them to become celibate, as nuns and most priests are called to be. Yes, the Vatican is asking them to put their business work as a calling, to see their business work as a calling from God, a vocation. The document affirms the sanctity of everyday work and says creating goods and services that make life better for people honors God and contributes greatly to the material and even the spiritual well-being of society. A main point of the vocation of the business leader is that people must live a congruent life, one in which everything they do at work, at home, at worship, aligns with the expectations of their faith. Of course, not all religions teach the same thing, but bringing one's full self to work, faith and all, matters not just to Catholics and other Christians, but to people of every faith, from Ahmadiyas to Zoroastrians and everything in between, including Baha'is, Buddhists, Hindus, Jains, Jewish people, Muslims, Sikhs, and so on. This is a theme Dean Andrew Abella and the Bush School of Business rightly emphasize. The vocation of the business leader observes that the greatest obstacle to fulfilling this spiritual calling is not corruption or the absence of the rule of law, greed, or poor stewardship of resources. Rather, the key barrier to this calling is the all too common practice of leading an incongruent, divided life, where faith is checked at the workplace door. Indeed, for people of faith, regardless of religion, such a divided life is inauthentic. It requires that they essentially go undercover with their faith, as if their core identity were something shameful. This constraint saps energy, adversely impacts job satisfaction, and degrades performance. In fact, for many people of various faiths, perceived restrictions on religious expression at work cause just as much damage as denying the importance of other facets of one's identity that are protected, as is religion, by employment non-discrimination law in the U.S., including race, color, national origin, age, disability, genetic information, and sex, including pregnancy, and more recently, sexual orientation and gender identity. Religion is integral to many people's identity as these other characteristics. As a top female executive in one of our nation's largest insurance company says, and I quote, "Over the years, the companies I had worked for had recognized my identity as a woman, but my identity and my faith is more important to me than my gender. Once the organization recognized that importance and supported my expression of my faith at work, I felt encouraged to be integrated, aligned, values-driven leader in the company, allowing me to reach my full potential." End quote. In a nutshell, that's why religious inclusion in the workplace is an imperative. I believe that the best and most convincing way to get that point across is by sharing with you principles from business leaders across multiple sectors and from multiple faiths in which they explain their why, as this woman executive did. At the same time, the business case for workplace religious equity, diversity, and inclusion is overwhelming. As companies globalize, they'll need employees who can relate to the daily experience of increasingly diverse customers. For billions of potential customers, including in the world's fastest growing economies, religious belief and practice are part of daily life. Having employees who understand the ways that faith and belief are manifest in public and private life will help companies avoid costly missteps and develop products and services better tailored to customer needs, which is an essential part of being competitive. And it's not just about the workplace. What's going on in these arenas strengthens the fabric of civility throughout the world. It's important to emphasize that the faith in the workplace movement is not just about allowing people to join clubs with others who believe what they believe and making them feel more appreciated, though that's helpful in its own right. It's also about building much-needed bridges across cultures. Taken together, the principles that I'll outline, directly and indirectly, show how a concerted strategic focus on workplace religious freedom for all can help strengthen cultures of trust, collaboration, and warmth. And we need this. Our times are filled with distrust and cynicism about others' motives. Someone needs to cross over and relate on a more profound, heartfelt level. Now is the time for religious freedom in business to take off. During the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown, I invited people from across corporate America to share their stories of why being able to bring their faith to work matters, many of whom were speakers at the conference we had at the Bush School of Business earlier this year that included Dean Abella. We're working on publishing that book. To give you a sneak peek at what we've discovered, I'll summarize the top principles underneath why the Faith at Work movement is being successful. First, it's a mosaic, not a melting pot. And they're not about dogma and politics, but rather service and celebration. At Salesforce, for example, their employee resource group, FaithForce, is becoming the fastest growing employee resource group in the company's history. They now have nearly 3,000 members and 17 regional hubs all around the world, from Mexico to Brazil, to Australia, New York, and London, all across the United States. The secrets to its growth are in what it isn't and what it is. So Faith Force emphasized that it is not proselytizing. They don't try to change others' beliefs. It's not political. They don't take official stances on political topics. It's not argumentative. They don't debate theology. It's not homogenizing. They don't merge faiths into one, but rather honor the distinctions of different faiths and worldviews. Now, what Faith Force is, it's educational. They learn about different traditions. It's philanthropic. They team together to give back to communities. In fact, last year alone, they donated 10,000 hours of volunteer work in their communities through Faith Force. And it's celebratory. They celebrate each other's holidays. The second principle is that these movements are devoted to serving the needs of the company. Ellen Barker, the senior vice president at Texas Instruments, who was a keynote speaker here at the Bush Schools Conference, notes that they have religion-based ERGs. They've had them for 2 decades. And she emphasizes that these groups have the same common purpose as all the other ERGs from different categories of identity. The first is to instill and be stewards of a collaborative and respectful culture within the company. Second, to cultivate talent and recruit talent. Third, to enhance business value through innovation and engagement. And fourth, to give back to their communities through volunteerism and other types of support, believing that stronger companies create stronger communities and stronger communities build stronger companies. The third principle we identified is that these groups serve as a bridge between people who are different, making faith at work a business asset. Examples of how these faith groups build bridges include the Abraham's Tent Initiative, co-sponsored at American Airlines by the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish employee resource groups. At American Airlines, they regularly come together with invited speakers from each of the traditions to discuss how their respective faiths address issues of the day, such as racism. Another example, with Faith Force that I've mentioned already, one of their early events was called Multiple Closets, where they invited people of faith who were also members of the LGBT community to share about their experiences of coming out of both closets. In some companies, for sure, LGBT people have reported that it is more difficult for them to come out as a believer than it was as a gay person, which isn't completely surprising given that inclusion around sexual orientation has received much more attention than religious inclusion, as our Ready Index report shows. The fourth principle is that minority and majority faiths are equitably part of the program. For example, unique faith-based groups have existed at Intel since 1995. However, just last year, a new cross-religion and faith ERG Leaders Alliance was brought together that included a wide variety of beliefs, including the atheists, agnostics, and their allies at Intel, Baha'i networks, the Intel Bible-based Christians network, Intel Jewish community, Intel Muslim employee group, the Intel Sikh employee group. Now, the leader of the Intel Bible-based Christian group network was the one who invited all these other groups to form this interfaith team with the full support of Human Resources, with the goal of building bridges of reconciliation across these cultural divides. This is an example of a case where leaders from the faith that is thought to represent the majority of employees, in this case Christianity, works to free people of all other faiths to live out their faiths as well. When the majority faith sees pluralism as an opportunity rather than as a threat, we can come closer to fulfilling our national motto in the U.S., e pluribus unum, or Latin for one, out of many, one. The fifth principle is, put quite simply, stop wondering if faith is a workplace issue. It is. The company Accenture's tagline is creating the most truly human economy in the digital age. Ellen Shook, Chief Leadership and Human Resource Officer at Accenture, wrote a compelling article on October 28, 2018, with that title, Stop Wondering If Faith is a Workplace Issue. It is. The date is significant. It's the day after the Tree of Life Synagogue mass shooting in Pittsburgh that claimed the life of 11 people and wounded 6 others, including 4 police officers doing Shabbat services. It was the deadliest attack on Americans' Jewish community in history, and it shook the lives of many people within Accenture. And as the company responded to the tragedy, it was the faith employee resource groups that helped lead the response, organizing vigils as well as recommending responses to help make people of faith in their company and in society feel comfortable and safe again. The 6th principle is faith and business is more than just employee resource groups. For example, company chaplains. Among the Fortune 100, Tyson Foods has the most well-developed chaplaincy program. The program that was established in the year 2000 was set up to provide compassionate care to team members and their families, regardless of their religious affiliations or beliefs. The program involves approximately 100 full and part-time chaplains at many Tyson food production plants and offices, providing access to a chaplain for many of their 141,000 team members. Tyson chaplains encounter team members who describe themselves across a broad spectrum, devoutly religious, spiritually agnostic, atheist, and uncertain. Tyson's chaplains bring specialized training in belief systems that equip them to come alongside their team members, listen to their story, and assist in utilizing the team members' beliefs to help them cope with whatever life brings. The 7th principle is that these groups promote all kinds of diversity and inclusion, not just religious inclusion. When people of different races, colors, national origins, ages, abilities, and sexes are free to also bring their faith to work, it adds extra empowerment, referred to in our Ready Index report as the religion dividend. For example, when Ingrid Vanderveld, the first entrepreneur in residence at Dell, shared her vision from God for a $100 million initiative for Dell to recruit and train women tech entrepreneurs, the leadership responded. Had she not been able to bring her full, authentic faith into the door of Dell, and for that faith to be taken seriously, millions of women today would be missing the empowering work she has done and is still doing to raise up women leaders and entrepreneurs in tech and finance. The 8th principle is that faith-friendly workplaces are good for our health, and it even saves lives. As mentioned, these principles come from a book that was written during the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown. One unique contribution identifying this period is from Harold Koenig, a medical doctor and the world's leading authority on religion and health. Just as his essay shows how faith brings healing and health to bodies, the others who contributed to this book show how faith brings healing and health to our societies and even our companies. And this is not just an academic. A member of the Bible-believing Christians at Intel shares how the group itself reached out to him at a time when he was on the verge of suicide. Their friendship and mentorship brought him back from the brink, and now he's a leader in the group, helping others, and a productive member of Intel. And the last principle is that this will not go away. Religion is one of the few social institutions that accompanies people from cradle to grave. Religion marks rites of passage in youth, such as baptisms or bar or bat mitzvahs, and it is present in last rites. And in most religions, it provides the hope of resurrection, that all is not done at death. In their faith, people are much more complex than typical management training recognizes. Two people who say they affirm the same faith may have very different perspectives and ideas. In fact, over time, an individual's faith is refined by life's experiences, learnings, and trials. This is the natural course of every human soul. Many contributors to the book that I've been talking about trace how much richer how their faith and work have developed and how much richer it becomes over time. When a person is today, where a person is today is not where he or she will be in a year. Accordingly, religious freedom in the workplace must allow for that development, which is the natural course of every human soul. Related to this, I'd like to invite you to my foundation, the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation's conference, together with the Catholic University of America's Bush School of Business, for the second annual Faith at Work National Conference for Faith-Oriented Employee Resource Groups. The inaugural conference in 2020 was the first time Fortune 500 companies gathered to share their experiences of opening the door to faith at work. The second conference would be held perhaps virtually and maybe a section in person in early spring 2021. Please visit our website, faithinbusiness.org, to see more information of the 21 conference, and you can find it under the drop-down for forums. I hope you can join us, and let's help encourage and develop virtuous business leaders who are a force for good.